In the United States, why the plan to have a huge hike in defense spending? That's the $54 billion question ahead of Donald Trump's first speech to a joint session of Congress. The new U.S. president ran as the nominee of a Republican Party that had mostly been against big spending ever since the Iraq War blew up the national budget. How will his plans go down with Tea Party supporters? Which brings us back to our first question. What are his plans? On Monday, generals handed in a draft of their strategy to defeat Islamic State militants. How close will it be to what Trump espoused on the campaign trail? At the time, he wanted a mix that involved bombing, as he put it, the hell out of ISIS in places like Raqqa, and sitting down with the Russians to flesh out a grand bargain. How different is the strategy that's being sold by his top brass? Moreover, there's the "we don't win" mantra anymore, repeated by Trump in a speech on Monday. We're going to fact-check that assertion with our panel and ask about the role and size of the world's biggest, and some might argue only, superpower. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Trump's spending blitz. With us, former UN General Dominique Trinquant. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
We're also joined from Dubai by a former defense intelligence officer, Ubay Shah Bandar of public relations consultants, Corvus MSL Group. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be joined from Washington by Stephen Grumman of the Atlantic Council, and from Orlando, Florida, by Trump supporter Ashley Ansara of the American Middle East Coalition for Democracy. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24Debate. The White House spokesperson promises an optimistic vision in Donald Trump's speech before Congress a little later. Here's what he had to say Monday to sell his huge defense budget hike.
We have to win. We have to start winning wars again. I have to say, when I was young in high school and college, everybody used to say, we never lost a war. And now we never win a war. We never win. And we don't fight to win. We don't fight to win. So we either got to win or don't fight it at all.
Let's say hello then to Ashley Ansara of the American Middle East Coalition for Democracy. Thank you for being with us. We don't win anymore like we did.
Good afternoon.
When we were in, when Donald Trump, of course, was in college, it was the Vietnam War. But isn't that a bit of an exaggeration, this "we don't win anymore"?
I think he's right. I mean, I came to America 42 years ago, in 1973. I've seen a lot of changes in the American society. America has lost tremendously the respect of a lot of nations in the Middle East and in Europe as well. I think we need to rebuild again the power and the strength of the United States. That's how you win a war, by strategize yourself. In Iraq, we lost billions and billions of dollars. We lost over 4,000 people were dead. And same time, America have more than 55,000 handicapped persons today from the Iraqi war. This has to end, and that's my opinion.
All right, so the Iraq War leaving an impact. General Trinquant, of course, there were two Iraq wars. There was the first Gulf War, and then there was the second one. What's the view among the brass here in Paris about what is the U.S. military might?
I think that the U.S. armies are able to win a war. The problem is not to win a war, is to win a peace. And when the offensive started in 2003, that was exactly the advice we gave to the U.S. military, and they agree. They say fighting a war and winning a war is easy. The big problem is winning the peace, and that's what's happened lately in Iraq after the first battle, which was a victory.
After the first battle, which was a victory, Saddam Hussein was toppled, but then, of course, the U.S. forces got bogged down and they owned the conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And the way they organized the peace in Iraq after winning the battle in Iraq was wrong. And then they had all the problem we know with the administration inside Iraq, the choice they'd made initially and then they have to change the plan in 2007, and then they have to change the plan several times. So the problem is that they have the will to fight the war, but they had no real plan. A plan for the peace for Iraq. They was not in the state of mind to organize the state in Iraq. And until now, we still have a problem in Iraq, in the state which was established after the victory of the U.S. military.
Yeah, let's fast forward to the President, Ubay Shah Bandar. Earlier, we were speaking with our correspondent who'd been reporting from the front lines in Mosul, Gallagher Fenwick, telling us he saw those U.S. forces there as advisors, and that the Iraqis trying to tread with caution so as not to kill too many civilians. It seems as though all sides are haunted by what happened after 2003.
Look, absolutely. And let's be real here. There are absolutely American boots on the ground in Iraq. President Trump has loosened the rules of engagement for American military officers and advisors to be fighting closer and closer to the front lines with their Iraqi counterparts and their Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga counterparts. We're seeing more and more military resources being expended in the fight against the so-called Islamic State or Daesh in Mosul and in Syria. So the U.S. military, U.S. Marines, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Air Force is being asked to do a lot more, but it hasn't been sufficiently resourced, given the asymmetric nature of the fight and of the threats that the U.S. military is facing from the Middle East, from Iraq and Syria to North Africa and to Sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel and to South Asia. Let's not forget, we also have a full ongoing war in Afghanistan that many have forgotten about. So it's a question of rebalancing American resources to provide the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, and the various services in the U.S. military resources that they need to win the fight. It looks like it's very clear that there's going to be a big shift in policy with this Trump presidency, where American Special Operations Forces are going to be fighting more and more on the front lines. They're going to be much more heavily engaged in the Arabian Peninsula, in Mesopotamia, and in northern Syria. And in order to fight successfully, you really need the resources, and that requires billions of dollars of more funds. And that's what I think we're seeing here, the Trump administration moving forward.
Yeah, we're getting to the heart of the matter here. How much is enough resources? An extra $54 billion, the figure that was bantied on Monday. Rebecca Rossman has the story.
A $54 billion boost to the Department of Defense. President Donald Trump previewed his first budget plan on Monday, which will include a nearly 10% increase in defense spending. In exchange, he's proposing cutbacks for all non-military programs.
This budget follows through on my promise to focus on keeping Americans safe, keeping out terrorists, keeping out criminals, and putting violent offenders behind bars, or removing them from our country altogether.
Trump also says he wants to cut the State Department budget by up to 30% and cut international aid. Another victim to the budget cuts, the Environmental Protection Agency, which has become known for its tense relationship with the new administration. But both organizations currently only spend a fraction of the Defense Department, with $50 billion of last year's annual budget going toward the State Department and foreign assistance, while the EPA had a budget of only $9 billion. The Pentagon, by comparison, had a budget of nearly $600 billion. The Defense Department stands by its high budget, however, noting that the military's share in federal spending has gone down from 57% during the Korean War to just 14.3% last year. The Democrats are calling Trump's plans to cut other spending irresponsible.
We don't know where the cuts are coming from, but it's hard to see with this magnitude of cuts that, once again, middle-class people, working families are going to be hurt.
Trump will unveil more details of his budget plans Tuesday evening when he gives his first address to a joint session of Congress.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24debate. On Facebook, Christophe saying the U.S. defense budget is already huge. Just trim the waste and keep that money for our desperate healthcare system. Ashley Ansara, what's your reaction to that viewer?
Well, I think really the budget of the United States for the defense has been one of the biggest issue in the American landscape. All the Americans ask, why do we need to increase the budget of the defense? The answer is really Trump gave it to us yesterday and also this morning. We have to keep America safe. We have to keep the free world safe. We have tremendous challenge coming from the outside the United States territory and outside of Europe. The challenges are huge, and that's what require a massive military buildup. But what I would like to refer to, I don't think the American budget will have anything to do with the middle class or the poor people in America. I think this will continue to have all the benefits that you do have, number one. Number two, the social security and the Medicare is still the same, no touch for it. But there is a lot of other issues that we have been suffering from it, like the EPA, for instance. I'm a CEO for a small company in Orlando. We suffered from the EPA regulation, the banking regulation. There are a lot of regulation that we have to go through to increase our business size, to increase our territory. So
you're saying that economic growth with less regulation is what's going to make is what's going to eventually, with a tax windfall, pay for this extra spending. We've had, Ashley Ansar, dozens of former U.S. generals who've signed a letter saying, please don't cut the State Department budget. What's your reaction to that when we're hearing talk of a 30% drop in its budget?
I will tell you from my own experience, the State Department have tremendous budget to undermine many nations in the Middle East. I was in Egypt when the State Department endorsed the Muslim Brotherhood. I was in Egypt when the American ambassador endorsed the movement and supported financially. What I'm trying to say is the State Department
supported the Muslim Brotherhood financially?
And having a budget for you. Absolutely, and I have a lot to prove that the United States, the American ambassador during the revolution in Egypt, she did finance, admit, and endorse the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood will never be flourish in the Middle East today unless the United States of America have some hand to do with it. Therefore, State Department have to change. The mission has to change. The USAID program to other countries has to change.
Ubay Shabandar, what's your reaction?
Well, let's look at some hard facts and some points here. In the United States military, only 3 of the Army Brigade combat teams out of a total of 58 are combat ready. That's 3 out of 58 brigade combat teams. For the U.S. Air Force, we had one Air Force general recently testified to Congress that the U.S. Air Force never in its history has ever been this weak with hundreds of planes that are not combat ready, hundreds of more pilots.
Ubay, explain this for a world audience, because the U.S. military budget is the same as the next 7 nations combined. In 2015, the Russians came in at number 5 with a $46 billion budget, whereas here we're talking about a $54 billion increase. The military budget for the U.S. is larger than that of France at $46 billion.
Absolutely, but the U.S. military has much more obligations globally than any other country in the world, certainly than any other Western country and its armed forces. Remember, we have a U.S. military forces in literally every continent, every time zone in the world. No other military has that type of capability, has that other type of reach. Also, it's important to remember that the $50+ billion of increase that President Trump is recommending to Congress really brings back defense spending to pre-2011 days, around what President Obama was recommending to Congress back in 2011. But the world has changed since 2011. In fact, since 2011, with the Arab Spring, the world has blown up. We have a much more assertive Russia, a much more assertive Iran, a much more assertive China. We have ISIS and Al-Qaeda spreading throughout the world, even though they're losing territory in parts of Syria and Iraq. So America's obligations in terms of sending its special forces throughout almost literally every time zone in the world is greater than ever. And just the other day, we had representatives from the generals, from the U.S. Air Force, from the U.S. Navy, from the U.S. Marine Corps, researching Congress, telling Congress that billions of dollars are needed in order to bring the U.S. military back at its optimal readiness level. I mean, if you think about it, that statistic of only 3 Army Brigade combat teams being, out of 58, being ready for warfare is a shocking statistic. So while, yes, no doubt the U.S. military...
But is that a money
budget,
issue or just simply an organizational issue?
It's an organizational issue, but it's also a manpower issue. It's also you need the necessary resources for the equipment. This attrition. The U.S. military since 2011 has been as active as ever. So they're having to do a lot more with a lot less, and that takes its toll on equipment, on resources, and on personnel.
All right, let me bring in Steve Grundman from Washington. He's the Director for Emerging Defense Challenges at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24
You're
debate. A short while ago, we heard Ashley Ansara saying that, well, despite what those former generals have said in that letter asking not to cut the State Department's budget, the State Department's not always been part of the solution. It's sometimes part of the problem, like in his native Egypt. That's what he's saying. What is your reaction when you see the size of this increase on defense spending and the cuts that are planned for diplomacy?
I think on the defense side of the ledger, this is a bit of a much ado about nothing. This is not a $50 billion increase in defense spending, certainly as compared to the amount of money that the Obama administration was planning to spend in 2018. It's maybe a $20 billion increase, although even that remains to be seen and is a function of some other things the administration hasn't revealed. For example, how much money it plans to spend on contingency operations, for example. On the domestic side, this is a calamity. It's also entirely infeasible. This budget, as proposed, the skinny budget, as the OMB director would like to call it, is infeasible legislatively, and primarily because there's no strategy that lies behind it. You're not going to be able to get members of Congress who, in various ways and in different districts, are going to object to different features of this. You're not going to be able to bring them aboard and get a majority of votes, let alone the 60 that they'll need in the Senate to pass this budget, without some kind of sense of strategy. What is the administration trying to do in the world? What is the role of America in the world, and how does this budget service those ambitions? All of that is a mystery, and until they've resolved that mystery, it's not especially worthwhile talking about $50 billion defense budget increase.
And we'll be picking up on that, the issue of what is America's role in the world, when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.